Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining. We'll just give it a couple minutes and see who all filters in here. Just to check here, if somebody can drop something in the chat or give me a thumbs up that you can hear me and see me, that would be great. Great. Thank you, Carolyn. Good to see you after, I guess it's 25 years since Messiah this year, so go us. All right, we'll give it another minute or two, see who else filters in. All right. Well, I do want to be respectful of everybody's time and also make sure that we can cover the content that I'd like to within the hour and also potentially leave some time for Q&A at the end. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So again, thanks for joining the webinar today. Appreciate your interest in this topic. I think it's an important one and one that a lot of organizations struggle with, but probably don't need to. I think there's a lot of complexity around retention that doesn't need to be that complicated. We're going to talk kind of philosophically and maybe academically at first about culture, engagement, and retention. But really, the latter half of the presentation, I want to talk more about like practical strategies around enhancing retention at your organization so you can really hold on to the people who are your great people. And the reality is, and this is why I chose the name for the webinar, great people don't stay by accident. It does require intentionality on the part of the organization, and there are ways to help ensure that they stay. Now, that's not to say that all of your great people are going to stay for all of time. And there's honestly good reasons for people to move on, right? Maybe you don't have the career advancement opportunity that they really need, and they are a high performer. You can take pride in the fact that you help prepare them for that next step in their career, even if it is with a different organization. And obviously, there are many people who cycle out of organizations who aren't all that great, and you're okay with them moving on as well. So, retention is not intended to be 100%, but it should be 100% or as close to 100% of the people that you would like to keep within the organization. We're going to talk first about the importance of culture and engagement in the retention of employees. And like I said, as we continue on through the presentation, we'll just get a little bit more practical about how do we actually practically think about or strategize about retaining employees. Okay, so this is kind of the academic part here. Dictionary definition of culture. So culture is the shared system of beliefs, values, customs, behaviors, symbols, and knowledge that a group of people use to understand the world and interact with one another. Now, obviously, in the context of this presentation, that group of people, it could be macro, your whole workplace, your whole company, could be micro, it could just be one of the teams or departments within the organization. Um, but the most important thing I think to know about culture, and I kind of referenced this already, it does require intentionality. It's not complicated, but it does require you to really kind of think through what is the kind of culture that you want to develop and propagate and facilitate as a leadership team. One of the things that I'll probably say multiple times during this presentation is that culture is really contingent on leadership. And not just leadership saying, here's what we want the culture to be, or here's what our values are, or here's our mission statement. All those are very important things, but it's really more about, actually modeling and putting into practice and demonstrating to your employees that this is the culture that we're going for, and here's how we're going to model it for you so that you can model it as well in your interactions with each other, interactions with clients and customers and other stakeholders. And it's pretty broad, right? Culture's pretty broad. It's evidenced here. It's beliefs, it's values, it's systems. I don't think systems is listed here, but a lot of what we think about, or I think about when it comes to culture, is you can absolutely positively operationalize culture. What I mean by that is, and I'll give you some practical examples later, is your processes, your procedures, your technologies, your communication systems, your meeting formats, your agendas, all of the different things that you have in place that help you run your organization can have a significant impact on the culture that you're going for. So we'll talk more about that as the presentation goes on. So that's culture defined. Second dictionary definition is engagement. So engagement is the state of being involved, interested, or committed to something, the act of participating in an activity. And I can guarantee that everybody on this call, whether you're engaged in your workplace, in a church, in a community group, with your family, you're typically not going to be engaged in that environment unless you actually are excited about it, passionate about it. You feel like you have synergy with it. So that happens in the workplace too, or should happen in the workplace. And the way that you get people to be engaged is to A, identify your culture, and B, figure out how to model and facilitate that culture. And hopefully it's a healthy culture that you're going for. And if it is, employees are going to follow, they're going to model, they will certainly be engaged. Culture drives engagement, and engagement really is what drives retention. So all those pieces fit together, all fit together. So just a couple of stats around employee engagement, and I'll just read through these. I think they're pretty interesting. So number one is that highly engaged teams experience 51% lower turnover in organizations that generally or typically have high employee turnover. So say you're, Department X in an organization that has 10 departments across the board, turnover is pretty high. Imagine if you really focused intentionally on the culture and the environment that you're trying to build with your team, 51% lower turnover. How good would your department look in relation to the other departments? And maybe even your department becomes kind of the go-to, like, how are you doing this? Like, how are you actually engaging your employees and holding on to your good people? Second one is employees who trust their managers are 58% less likely to be actively searching for another job. Trust being the key word here. This highlights the connection between engagement, leadership, and retention. A lot of the practices that we put into place in our organizations either communicate a high level of trust And I don't mean just trust of management. I also mean trust of employees. It's a bi-directional kind of engagement. But trust really does make a big difference and really determines if people are going to be engaged over the long haul. 42% of employee turnover is preventable. Doesn't that sound great? Now, you can't control all turnover. Like I said before, you have people who leave because they need to move on, and we know that. We have people who leave that we just don't have the opportunity for them to stay and really grow and flourish, and those are okay too. But yeah, 42% of employee turnover is preventable, often through better management practices, engagement efforts, and employee conversations. And we'll talk more a little bit later about good communication practices to really foster a good level of engagement. And then lastly, among employees who leave their organizations, 37% cite engagement and culture-related reasons as their primary motivation for leaving. People generally don't leave an organization for any one reason. It's really the compilation of their experience. But it's interesting to see that engagement and culture are driving factors in many people who are leaving organizations. And then when you combine that with well-being and work-life balance concerns, these factors account for 68% of departures, which really far exceeds pay-related reasons alone. I think sometimes or oftentimes there's an assumption that people leave for a better paycheck. And that might be true in some cases, and especially at the lower levels where, in this day and age with inflation, if they can make $1 more an hour somewhere else, they're going to do it. And they're going to go get something else to be able to pay the bills. And I get it, right? But I think as you get higher in the organization, or even at those lower levels, if you can be competitive, not only with your compensation, but also with the kind of culture that you're developing and facilitating, there's a good chance that you'll hold on to your good people a lot longer and not have that turnover. Sorry about that. All right, just a couple of other general thoughts before we kind of move into more of the practical strategies. So culture does drive engagement. I indicated this before. I mean, it requires intentionality around the kind of culture that you're going for and the way in which you handle yourself. And when I say yourself, I mean the leadership team, the organization at large. The way in which you handle yourself is really going to drive the level of engagement with your staff. So culture shapes how people feel at work. Psychological safety, which if you were on my last webinar, we delved into this a little bit, but psychological safety is definitely more of a hot topic in the last couple of years, and I would say also better understood. So psychological safety, in my opinion, is really the opportunity or creating an environment where people feel safe to speak up without any fear of retaliation. They feel comfortable, they feel heard, they feel respected, and even if they are delivering a difficult message to a peer or more likely to a supervisor or superior, they feel comfortable doing so because they know that they are again, being heard, respected, and that their feedback is welcome, right? So when we as organizations create a culture of psychological safety, this exponentially and naturally results in a higher level of commitment and enthusiasm for the organization. So just to kind of give you a couple of practical examples around how you can create psychological safety, because I know that sounds a bit kind of maybe ethereal or academic. So a couple things. As leaders, I think we have an opportunity to admit mistakes publicly and early so that people can see that it's okay to make mistakes and it's also okay to own them. Closing the loop on input. So, if we as an organization have different mechanisms through which people can feed information back, we better be willing to do something with that information and then closing the feedback loop with input on what is actually being done with that information. Responding well to bad news. I mean, in business, nonprofits, any organization, inevitably there's going to be bad news of some kind, right? So responding well to bad news is really a good way to model a good, healthy culture. And then making failure a source of learning. fail forward is kind of a common term or phrase that's used, but failure is really an opportunity to identify, okay, what could we have done better so that we don't repeat the same mistakes next time? But a healthy culture is one that invites failure and invites discussion around how we can actually create a better working process going forward or do things differently to correct what was considered a failure the first time around. Culture reinforces purpose and meaning. I think being able to communicate a clear mission. So again, this does go back to having a well-refined mission statement, but communicating a clear mission, connecting employees' daily work to the big picture. I pulled it out here. There's this book by Horst Schulze called Excellence Wins, and he is the co-founder of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Company. One of the things that he talks about in his book is at every level in the organization, all the way down to housekeeping and beyond, every employee is given the opportunity to really fully understand what is their role in the organization and how it fits with the bigger picture. So nobody can just say, I'm just the accountant, or I'm just the front desk person, or I'm just the director of hospitality, or whatever it may be. Nobody can say, I just am, because every every person, every part that is completed by one of those people is important. So connecting their daily work to the big picture and the mission statement of the organization, and then helping employees see the why and not just the what. I think it's, for anybody on this call who has kids or nieces and nephews or, other kids in your life, that kids generally want to know the why, not just the what. And I think it's really no different with employees. Giving them the rationale and the context for why decisions are being made is super critical in terms of driving that culture and driving engagement. So culture guides behavior and expectations, setting the norms around accountability, collaboration, and communication. So this is where it gets a little bit more kind of practical, where you can operationalize things. If your culture is one where you're saying we want to hold people accountable, well, what does that look like? I mean, do you have a refined performance management process where you're circling back and saying, hey, are you meeting the expectations of your job? Are you modeling the core values of the organization? Are you tracking progress towards the goals that were set for you at the beginning of the year? That's where the rubber meets the road and the culture of accountability really comes alive. Collaboration. What kind of technology do you use to facilitate collaboration? Do you have cross-functional meetings, or do your departments kind of work in silos? And then communication. And we'll talk about some ideas later on here, but how well are you communicating with your staff? How transparent are you being within reason? Are you inviting opportunities for employees to give feedback and then for you to give feedback to them? So culture really guides behavior and expectations. And then culture influences leadership behavior. Leaders are culture. Everybody obviously factors into the culture, but leadership is where it starts. It's like anything else, whether it's a strategic initiative or some other directive, or again, here, culture, leaders really drive that and it filters down. Leaders are the culture. So listen actively, give regular feedback, and recognize contributions. Culture affects trust. I did touch on this a little bit earlier. In my opinion, trust affects everything. When you have a culture that is openly transparent, within a reason, like you can't share everything, but if you could be transparent around where the organization is going, what's going well, maybe what's not, maybe some opportunities or sharing about some things that could have gone better and how we're going to fix them, all that transparency really makes a big difference. Fairness and consistency, and then genuine care. I think kind of the old school thought process around running a business was that it's like, hey, folks, leave your stuff at home, check it at the door, come to work, be 100% present, and this is your primary focus. Those days are long gone, right? It's really hard for a lot of people to check their personal stuff at the door because there's just a lot going on. And a lot of people who are coming to work don't have resources. They don't have communities. They don't have people to really rely on financially or to help with childcare or even people to talk to. Fractured families, people don't have good friendships, no communities. Like people don't really have the opportunity or the outlet to really express what they're thinking outside of work. And so they bring all of that to work with them. And I'm not suggesting that we become social workers or social care organizations, but we do have to be open to the idea that really caring for our employees in a more holistic way beyond what we maybe have done in the past is going to be paramount. And all of that results in greater trust. Culture determines whether employees see growth opportunities. So, is your organization thinking about things like stretch assignments or learning programs or career paths? What kinds of programs, initiatives, policies that you're putting out, what are they communicating about your organization? Are they communicating that you believe and support employee growth and development? Or are the absence of those programs or the ways in which those programs are structured, are those actually communicating that you're okay with people just coming, doing their job, going home, and not really ever growing? Culture impacts recognition and rewards. This is a huge one. So I've worked for organizations, specifically organizations that were very compliance focused for good reason, but sometimes that compliance focus overshadowed the opportunity to recognize the effort and not just the results. So sometimes when you work in a very compliance-driven organization, you obviously want to pass audits, you want to make sure you don't have gaps and violations. All of those things are very important. But then when you get that audit back or that licensing back, and maybe a couple violations came up, like, yes, we should definitely address those violations and understand the root cause and how to fix those. But we also have to recognize that there was a lot that went into the quality of care being provided, a lot of effort that went into preparing for the audit that actually went really well. So 98% good, 2% not so good. Sometimes we tend to focus on the 2% to the exclusion of the 98%. So celebrating those wins, I think, is really important, and also encouraging peer-to-peer appreciation. I think it's one thing, and it's super important for supervisors to express appreciation. I think sometimes it's actually better received peer-to-peer when your coworker is saying, hey, great job, did an awesome job with this, appreciate your team effort or whatever it may be. And then culture creates community and belonging, support inclusion and relationship building. I'm going to share an example in a little bit that I actually stole from one of my current client, borrowed from one of my current clients, around a format that they use for one of their meetings. This is a group of people who are global. And it's a kind of a newly forming team. There's an opportunity for them to really get to know each other personally as well as professionally. Yeah, yeah. Are you guys hearing some music? One moment, please. Sorry about that. Sometimes the challenges of working at home, and it looks like our signals got kind of tied up there. So anyway, what I wanted to talk about a little bit, just briefly with one slide, is why culture and engagement matters when it comes to recruitment. So top talent chooses workplaces with strong cultures. Engaged employees become powerful brand ambassadors, and culture shows candidates what it's really like to work for you. So what I'm essentially saying here is that when you have a workforce that is highly engaged, it creates a really uh, kind of compelling experience for candidates who are coming in to consider working for your company. So uh, I think when you do a good job of creating a high culture that fosters engagement, where you have employees who are switched on, this basically creates an opportunity for candidates to see that as they're engaging with you and considering coming to work for you. So just be mindful of the fact that what you do intentionally with your existing staff can really have repercussions or good implications for bringing new staff on board. So when it comes to retention, so why does culture engagement matter? So culture creates a sense of belonging. Engaged employees feel emotionally connected to their work. Culture shapes daily experiences, and daily experiences drive turnover. I think this is super key because every little thing that happens during the course of an employee's day is certainly going to impact whether or not they feel engaged. So if they're at the water cooler and the VP of operations walks in and doesn't say hello, that certainly impacts their experience. If they are in a negative way, right? Or let's just say that you have staff who are in a meeting that has all levels in the organization within it, and everybody has an opportunity to speak and share their perspectives, then that's a real positive experience, right? So you're going to create engagement that way. So every little thing that happens from big programs that get rolled out all the way down to these infrequent kind of minor interactions, they all have an impact. Engagement reduces burnout and boosts well-being, and engaged employees create environments where new hires succeed. So what do I mean by that, right? When you have an engaged workforce and you have a new hire coming on board, you've got employees who are looking to go out of their way to make the new hire welcome, to make sure that their new hire has the resources that they need, that they are getting connected with the people that they need to be connected to. Engaged employees are going to be the ones who really make sure that new hires onboard successfully and then ultimately stay with the organization, which improves your retention rates. All right. So I mentioned kind of focusing more on practical strategies here, right? So a couple thoughts that I had around some things that you might be able to consider. Some of these things I've seen actually work well in practice um, in the past at prior employers. Other things I've heard about, and I think that they're great ideas. So I wanted to share them with you. So I wonder if any of your organizations do stay interviews. I think we're all very, very familiar with exit interviews, which have a time and a place, right? It's important to collect information from people who are leaving the organization to see what you can learn in terms of things that can be done better. But the reality is, once you get to that exit interview, they've got one foot out the door. It's unlikely you're going to pull them back, right? So it's almost too late. A better option, maybe an and/or option, would be a stay interview. So what I've seen done here is within the first, say, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, maybe even a year, pick whatever kind of time period you want. Take an opportunity to conduct what are called stay interviews. And essentially, through a variety of questions, you're asking the question, why do you stay? Um, you can structure it with a lot of different questions, right? I think one of my favorite questions that I've heard asked in a stay interview is, what was the last time that you thought about leaving the organization? That kind of stops people and gets them thinking about, well, gosh, A, have I ever thought about leaving? B, how recent was it? And C, what was it that caused me to stay? Or maybe am I still looking? So, right. So asking those questions around what is it that keeps you at the organization can be very helpful because either the person's going to come back and say, everything's great. I love what I do here. Keep on doing what you're doing. Or you might get an earful of feedback that is giving you an opportunity proactively to address some of those issues and create a better experience for that person before they leave. Next one would be career paths. Identify the ways in which they could advance or laterally progress in the organization. I mentioned before about organizations that really don't do a good job around creating opportunities for people to hone their skill sets, diversify their skill sets, get involved in things kind of outside of their primary role. But that's one way to really think about creating engagement with your employees. At my last organization, before I went into consulting, we developed a career pathing program for the vast majority of our workers were at the entry level direct care providers. And we created a career pathing program where they had the opportunity to develop additional skills, increase their knowledge, but with those skills and knowledge increases came pay increases as well. They weren't huge pay increases, but they were enough to communicate the fact that, hey, you've done the work. You've really put the time in to gain additional knowledge and skill, and now we want to reward you for that, and it will be reflected in your paycheck. We also had done some bonuses as well, again, to kind of say, you did a lot of work to get here, and we want to recognize your achievement in that regard. Family first. I kind of alluded to this before, where old school thought process was that work was most important and family was second. I think anymore, most places that's the reverse, and that's the way it should be. A real simple way that I think you can think about doing family first is really encouraging employees to use their vacation time or their PTO. I've definitely worked with people in the past who pride themselves on, I never take my PTO time. I never take my PTO time. Well, somebody who doesn't take their PTO time generally is not the happiest person and generally is not the most effective or efficient. So I think as organizations, we have an opportunity to really promote that and find ways to get employees to take the time off that they have earned. Another kind of interesting thought was around hiring right. Um, Lately, I think it's been a little bit easier to fill positions because there are so many people in the labor market and a lot of talent. But during COVID and even a couple of years after COVID, where the labor market was tight, it was very easy for a lot of organizations to make a desperation or a bad fit hire. This is honestly a recipe for disaster because what happens is if you decide, well, gosh, we only have one or two candidates to choose from. We're not super excited about Joe or Sally, but you know what? We need to fill the seat. What ends up happening is you bring in the person that you know is not going to be a good fit, and then they have implications on the rest of the staff, right? Impacting retention of other staff with somebody who probably should not have been brought in the first place. So hiring right the first time and really investing in your process around uh, getting the right person and even waiting to get the right person, as painful as that might be, it pays dividends in the long run. And then information sharing is a big one. We all know that when there is an absence of information, narratives are going to form. And oftentimes, those narratives that people form in their minds are not accurate, right? So you have a lack of information, you've got false narratives. So share as much information as you can, as often as you can. I've worked for a couple of organizations that did a really, really good job around having regular, what we would call town hall meetings. It was an opportunity for leadership to get on a call with anybody in the organization interested in learning more about what was going on with us. So we would share financial updates, operational updates, staffing updates, celebrating things like new hires and birthdays and service anniversaries, all those kinds of things. But it was also an opportunity for employees to ask questions. At both of those organizations, we actually allowed employees to submit questions ahead of time, either attached to their name or anonymously if they so chose. Um, Submit the questions ahead of time. We would then be better prepared to answer those questions, and we would answer those questions on the call. Or we would also open it in real time on the call for employees to ask questions. So I think information is really, really key to building a healthy culture and engaging with employees. Encouraging passion. What makes them tick and how can we leverage that? This is only as good as frontline supervisors really being in tune with in tune with what their employees are good at, what their strengths are. And that doesn't mean that we leverage strengths all the time. I think everybody has things in their jobs that are things that they don't necessarily like to do. But to the fullest extent possible, really understanding what are people good at, what are they passionate about, and how can we leverage that? Questions, inviting questions and allowing people to challenge you. I think this is super critical. And not just saying like any question's a good question. If somebody asks a question and it's a good question and you become defensive or you um, kind of respond in a downplaying kind of way, that's not, you're not really following what you said. You're not really inviting their questions and welcoming them. So allow employees to speak openly and honestly and allow them to challenge you. Recognition is another huge part of engagement and retention, and reward with what resonates. What's good for Joe or what really motivates Joe is not going to be what's good or what motivates Sally. So again, it really takes that frontline supervisor to understand what's important. Is it money? Is it just verbal affirmation? Is it additional time off? Is it a plaque on the wall? I mean, any number of things, right? So really rewarding with what resonates makes a big difference. Telling the truth, honesty is the best policy, and don't sugarcoat, right? I was thinking back earlier to when I worked for a financial institution, and I remember that we were getting ready for an acquisition. And during the process of the acquisition, the CEO got in front of the staff who were being from the financial institution that was being acquired and essentially said, and I don't think he was trying to be untruthful, but he was trying to create a moment where people felt good about it. But he essentially said, we don't plan to have any layoffs in the merger process. Well, at the end of the day, once all the due diligence had been done and we looked at the two organizations and we said, who is it that we actually need? We did have to let some people go. So, when you choose to kind of sugarcoat things or say something that you think is going to feel good in the moment, but won't actually play out in the long run, that breaks down trust and certainly has an impact on engagement. And then mentoring. I've worked for a couple of organizations that have good, solid mentor programs where you've got people who are seasoned to their jobs, love teaching and training, love building relationships. Definitely leverage those people, access those people to become mentors, maybe even compensate them for their efforts. Maybe have some structure around what it is that you want for them to do with their mentees, what kind of communication cadence do you want them to have, what are the expectations, but leveraging those people in your organization who are passionate about what you do, they're good about what they do, and they can bring other people along in their roles. So I mentioned earlier about kind of borrowing something from one of my clients, but facilitating connection. What is it that we can help our staff learn about each other personally? And then how can we help each other professionally? So this particular organization, as I mentioned before, they have a group of people who are kind of in that forming stage as a group, and they're global, right? So you've got people all over the globe who have never actually met each other in many cases physically in person. So they've set up this format of this meeting that happens once a month that has basically 5 different things that they do. They ask each person in the group to identify their personal best. What's something that happened that month that they're especially proud of? What's their professional best? What's something that happened professionally that they're, again, very proud of? Sharing 2 projects that they're working on. What this does is it helps to create awareness around what they're working on and give some visibility to the others in the group as to what is a priority for them. And then lastly, asking the question of their coworkers and their peers, how can we help, or how can you help me? Where am I getting stuck in something? What is it that you could do as my coworker to really help me advance something that has been established as a priority for me? So, in this kind of setting, and this is not the only format that you can use, I just think this is a good example. It's creating personal connection and it's creating professional connection and it's building the team, especially in an environment where people are geographically dispersed and maybe a little bit kind of not connected quite yet because they're new to each other. And then meeting their practical needs. What is most important to them? And then how do we bridge those gaps? Now, the thing is, you could come up with all kinds of ideas around meeting the practical needs of your employees, which is fine. But if you don't really ask them, you're not going to get very far, right? Like, why work on a bunch of stuff if what you're going to put out for them to use is not actually important to them and is not actually a gap that can be bridged? So just a couple of thoughts that I had around practical strategies for meeting practical needs. Regular market-based salary reviews. I have a couple clients right now where we are looking at, is our compensation actually competitive? Maybe we haven't looked at it in a couple of years. Maybe the jobs have changed. And we just don't have a good sense of whether or not the compensation for these positions is really externally competitive as well as internally equitable to each other within the job hierarchy. Performance bonuses and incentives, not every organization can do this, especially ones with smaller margins, but even small bonuses, like little spot bonuses of $50 here, $50 there for little things that happen, just kind of pop-up recognition. I think those things can be very helpful. Comprehensive health coverage, this is something that's getting really, really difficult. But the reality is, especially on the small business front, and for nonprofits who are on the smaller side, there are many more differing kinds of alternative options available than there used to be. It used to be that you could just get a fully insured product, just a traditional health plan. Now you've got things like an ICHRA and a QSERA, and really just kind of thinking through like how do we structure our benefits to be the most cost effective yet competitive as they possibly can be, using some of these alternative plan options that are now available. A retirement savings plan with a match. Most employees have a need for retirement. We all should be planning for that in the future. Maybe you've got an older demographic that is now trying to catch up. Maybe you've got a younger demographic where they really did be thinking about saving for retirement, but thinking about doing a retirement savings plan with even a small match can be a huge win. Paid parental leave. I think the US is one of two countries in the entire world that doesn't do paid family medical leave, which is kind of wild to think about. So maybe you can be an employer that's a little bit different and you offer just a week of paid parental leave when somebody has a baby or takes a child in for foster care or adopts a child. Maybe it's 2 weeks. It doesn't have to be anything super huge. But again, is that a need within your employee population? And how could you possibly meet it even in a small way? Flexible work arrangements, mental health resources, access to community resources. I wanted to touch on this briefly. At my last organization, I mentioned we had a lot of staff who were working at the entry level, kind of scraping by. We did the best that we could with compensation, but we also recognized that they had a lot of needs around getting their car fixed and childcare, adequate childcare, those kinds of things. And so we decided to put together a centralized repository of all the community resources in a centralized place on our intranet to say, hey, if you've got issues with childcare, fixing your car, domestic abuse, food insecurity, all those kinds of things, here are some go-to places to go to. The reality is, like a lot of employees, when they're in crisis, I think that they conceptually know that there are community resources, but they become overwhelmed and then they just don't know where to go. So having a resource like that where they can think through where do I go and kind of focusing their time was helpful. As an HR department there too, we also spent a lot of time connecting employees with resources, and that was a great way to help employees feel more included, heard, and engaged. So just wanted to kind of toss out some of those practical strategies. But as far as your action plan going forward out of this call, a couple things. Assessing your current culture. And as I mentioned before, the first step is truly the most important one. Ask your employees what they need. If you don't ask, you're not going to know, and you might spend your time on things that don't really resonate with them. A great way to do that would be through a satisfaction and engagement survey. Certainly something I could help you with if you're interested, and really just getting a full sense for what's important to them so that you can focus on the right things. And then year over year, repeating that survey, right? So that you're seeing, are we seeing some of the same themes and patterns? Are we, and as we're identifying what those gaps are and closing them, is it actually meeting employees' needs? So assessing the culture, identifying the engagement gaps for staff, and then implementing that continuous improvement cycle, including the collection of ongoing feedback, so that year-over-year survey to measure the efficacy of any changes that you're making. I think it's important to kind of toot your horn a little bit. When you're making changes, make sure that you're promoting what you've changed to your target audience, your staff, right? There's nothing worse than coming up with a grand initiative around addressing a gap and then not promoting it and making sure that staff are aware. So promote what you've changed. Leverage your internal ambassadors. If you've got better than average retention, you more than likely have people in your midst at the staff level who are excited about what you're doing, excited about the organization, who are willing to be kind of your spokespeople, right? So as you're implementing different programs, different benefits, different communication strategies, make sure that you're leveraging those people to get the word out because peer to peer, that often makes a lot more, it's just, it makes a better impact than just leadership talking about it or an email going out. And then obviously fix your process where needed. So how can I help? If there's anything that we've talked about today on the culture, engagement, retention front, if you feel like you are struggling with retention at your organization and you've got some general ideas around what your employees need, but you're not really sure how to address those with implementing certain things, I can certainly be helpful. There's a QR code to my website. My contact information is here. I am happy to engage with you free of charge just to kind of talk about where you're at, where you want to go, and maybe some ways for us to partner together in getting to where you want to be, especially as it relates to retaining the great staff that you have. So I'm going to open it up for questions now, and I will go into the chat here. If you have a question, go ahead and drop it in here. Any questions from the group? So Carolyn says, what if you are a mid-level and want to influence a positive culture, but you are not at the top of the organization? That's a good question, right? Because we often talk about the most influential things coming from the top down. But I do think at a grassroots level, people who are entry level to mid-level have an opportunity to influence that culture, right? And I think what you do is you bring your, I don't really like the term authentic self necessarily, but bring your authentic self to work every day, model the values that you know are important to the organization, interact with people in the kindest ways, in the most respectful ways, interact with people in the ways in which you want people to interact with you. Be kind of that role model at your level of the organization in your position, and let that be seen. And I don't mean that like in a haughty way, like, look at me, I'm demonstrating the values, like those kinds of things, but just be who you are and act in a way that you think is representative of the organization. I also think for an organization that is at least open to ideas, like use the communication mechanisms that are available to you. So if you have a town hall meeting where feedback is collected, if you have that comments box, or it's probably not a box anymore, it's probably more like a Google form, use those opportunities to put forth your thoughts around how to shape the culture. I think unless you uh, offer something, they can't tell you no, right? So the worst thing that they can say is no, but at least offer your idea and do your part with the thoughts that you have. So those are my thoughts there. And then Rick says, what else can a team do that does not share geographic space? Well, I think it probably depends on the resources of the organization, right? We're in a very like tech connected environment anymore. I was thinking about again the group or the client that I have where they are global. Just yesterday, we were on this call using that format that I mentioned with the personal best and professional best. And these were literally people all over the globe, right? So having a regular cadence of meetings where people have the opportunity to interact, I think is a really important thing. And I think interacting on a personal level as well as a professional level is important. So personal matters, professional matters. I think it kind of helps to build that teamwork. I think if you can bring your teams together physically in one place, understanding that takes time and takes resource, I think that's another great way. Um, yeah, just a couple thoughts in terms of, teams that are in different geographic spaces. I think it certainly can be done, but I think it requires intentionality and it requires a regular cadence. If it's just kind of a one-off, like once every couple of years, you're never really going to get like, a team culture that's fully engaged with each other. And then Elizabeth said, are there unique challenges in a nonprofit that is run entirely by volunteers? Yes. I think what happens in organizations that are run by volunteers is that while all of those people are well-intentioned, because why else would they be doing the work for no pay? While they're well-intentioned, the reality is they're probably doing this on the side. It's not their primary focus. So what ends up happening is there is not a high level of accountability, right? So you've got volunteers doing things, not doing things. You don't have a cadence of meetings. You don't have structure around where the organization is going necessarily. And so there definitely are some unique challenges with keeping a nonprofit moving forward when you're relying on people where it's not their primary focus, for sure. Now, do I think that if you have the right volunteers who are intentionally focused on creating connection, creating a strong culture, even within the unit of volunteers, that absolutely can happen, but you have to have the right people who have the time to be able to commit to it. Anything else? Other questions that you all might have? All right. Well, I appreciate everybody coming out today. I will send out a recording of the webinar, including my quick exit and return back to the screen due to my sound issues. Apologies for that. But I will send the recording out. And then if you have anything that you feel that your organization needs or you want to chat further about it on the HR front and the culture front, happy to do that with you. I am here at your service. So thanks so much and enjoy your afternoon.